This lecture looks at the downfall of ancient Rome, beginning with the Severans and ending with Constantine moving the capital of Rome to Constantinople. The late empire lasts from 193, the death of Commodus, to 337, when we find this new capital of the eastern part of the empire is going to be established and will still remain the capital for Byzantium until 1453. The Roman Empire that was inherited by the late imperial emperors is going to be one on the brink of collapse. By the time we reach Hadrian and the High Empire, the expansive borders of the Roman Empire were impossible to guard, and so they began hiring the tribes on the borderlands, such as the Germans that we have here, the Goths that they were called, to police themselves. That eventually we find they cannot sustain this huge expansive empire. Commodus is going to be assassinated, bringing the Antonine dynasty to an end. The philosopher emperor's son had been the first in centuries to rule, being the blood relative of an emperor. Before him, we find emperors are going to adopt these very well and accomplished rulers to become emperor. Now with Commodus, we have a megalomaniacal ruler that displays the same character flaws as Nero and Caligula. But regardless, Commodus is going to inherit an empire that is already in decline. The economy is declining, the frontiers are rebelling, the bureaucracy that governs ancient Rome is disintegrating, and the official state religion, which was polytheistic, placing the emperor at the head of this religion, is losing ground to Eastern mystery cults, such as Mithraism and Christianity. This undermines the authority of the Roman emperor and the entire structure the Roman emperor is and the empire is built around. This leads us to the late empire, where all of these various religious, economic, and political issues come to a head. With the assassination of Commodus, we have another civil war, as always follows the end of a dynasty. Remerging from the civil war is Septimius Severus, who will found the next dynasty known as the Severans. He is an African-born general that, like Vespasian and Trajan before him, is a hard-bitten, rational military man. He establishes a dynasty that will last a half a century and is going to ensure stability continues by claiming to be the son of Marcus Aurelius, hence continuing that dynastic tradition. He even shows himself with portraits like that of Aurelius, with the long hair and beard of his Antonine father. Specifically, Aurelius grew his hair and beard longer to associate himself with philosophers instead of soldiers. The shorter cropped haircut is going to be demanded by Roman soldiers so that enemies cannot grab onto it. So in this very elongated and exaggerated spiraling beard and longer curly locks that require drill work to produce, he is trying to continue the tradition from the Antonines. In his only preserved painted portrait, here we have the family, the Severans, including the empress, the emperor, and their two sons, painted in tempera or using egg yolk. The family shown here includes his wife Julia Domna, the daughter of a Syrian priest, as well as their sons Geta and Caracalla. He reveals his age, that Septimius Severus does, by showing gray hair and how he is associated and close to his Antonine father Marcus Aurelius. Looking carefully at the painted family portrait, one notices fairly quickly that there is an aberration. One of the sons' faces has been erased, literally. We know that later on, Caracalla would have his brother and his brother's wife murdered. Now this, of course, is standard practice among royal families to ensure that the offspring of his brother could not challenge his right to rule, nor his son's right to rule. He also had the Senate damn his memory. This is known in ancient Rome as damnatio memoriae, or the damnation of memory. Now, the idea of chiseling someone's face off of monuments and striking through their names in official records is not new. We have record of it going back to Mesopotamia and Egypt, to where unpopular rulers like Hatshepsut and Akhenaten are going to have their statues destroyed. However, the Romans developed this into a political tool and are going to systematize the practice. They have entire bureaucratic offices dedicated to destroying someone's memory. After taking over and becoming the undisputed heir to the Roman throne, we find that Caracalla is going to reveal in his portraiture his suspicious character. So carrying on that tradition from Marcus Aurelius, many of these late imperial portraits will reveal the psychological disposition, fear, anxiety, and or suspicion of these figures. We find that in this portrait, Caracalla radically turns off to look over his shoulder to his left. Now, for us, we see this as an obvious forecast and foretelling that he will be assassinated in his 6th year of his reign, as many as dozens that will be assassinated in the 3rd century, leading into the soldier emperor period. Still, this continues that approach that Marcus Aurelius had used in his portraits, where we reveal something of the character of Caracalla. Note, of course, that his hair is cut short, as is his beard, showing us that he is not associating himself with the philosopher type of Marcus Aurelius, but instead with the soldier type. For on his deathbed, Caracalla's father had told him to mind the soldiers and pay them first. So he associates himself with the soldiers. Now, in the gesture looking off around his shoulder, we might see that as suspicious, but obviously he is attempting to convey a powerful persona here, revealing his character of a hard-bitten military man's son. In the capital, Caracalla very rightly is going to curry favor with the public, just as had earlier emperors such as the Flavians when they built the largest amphitheater, the Colosseum. So too would Caracalla build the largest bathing and recreational complex in Rome. The so-called Baths of Caracalla are going to leave a lasting reminder and impression on the cityscape of Rome, its towering 140-foot tall walls still standing today. The brick-faced concrete is going to be 50 acres in total and could accommodate 1,600 bathers at a time. An immense structure, and it was not only for bathing. The entire structure and complex would have been a small city, taking into account it has recreational areas to bathe, to steam, to exercise, it has tennis courts, it has libraries, audience halls, lecture halls, and then, of course, gardens surrounding this entire complex. The baths themselves in the center are going to be symmetrical, organized along a central axis, and are going to reveal the Roman penchant and custom of bathing, first in warm water, or the tepidarium, then hot water, the caldarium, and then finally cold water, the frigidarium, in these baths. So after going through the process of each one of these pools and sitting in them, you could then get out and dry off and enjoy any of the other numerous educational and or athletic activities possible here. The concrete drum would have been circular at the center of this chamber and was taller than that of the Pantheons and almost as large. An impressive open interior space it would have been indeed. But that was not the only part of the Baths of Caracalla. There were these sculpted and landscaped gardens, lecture halls, libraries, exercise courts, or swimming pools, all of which in this massive complex which was free to the public, but however was run in an underground area by slaves, literally showing us the division of Roman labor and civilization. Here we have a cutaway of the structure with these lavish sculptures, including the Farnese Hercules and other statues of gods, inspiring vigorous exercise in those in attendance. The walls, of course, are still very impressive, and we have, inspiring a later basilica here, these side aisles, which are barrel-vaulted chapels. Here we have the copy of the Farnese Heracles by Glycon of Athens, which was paid for, which was commissioned specifically for this location to inspire vigorous exercise so that we would look like Hercules upon finishing our exercise regimen and routine. The original appearance of the Baths of Caracalla can be divined by looking at the frigidarium that survives from the Baths of Diocletian in a church. That's similar in the decoration with the colored marble, the composite capitals, the immense groin vaulting and clear lighting, and/or the fenestrated sequence of groin vaults that would let in light to this large interior space that spared no expense in order to ensure Caracalla's legacy would be cemented in history. Unfortunately, Caracalla would be assassinated, bringing the Severan dynasty to an end. The last, of course, of the family being Severus Alexander. What followed is a half-century of civil war, longer than the previous civil wars that we discussed that led to the Flavians or the Severans taking over. At this time, the period of the soldier emperors, we have general after general declared emperor by their troops and then being murdered, usually by the Praetorian Guard. Only architectural projects would be commissioned at this time, and in fact the only one is a new defensive wall around the capital, showing us how much Roman power has decayed. Now they're not only concerned about protecting the borders of Rome, but the very capital city itself. That being, they're worried that all of these various barbarian tribes and hordes are going to make their way down and sack the city. At this time, soldier emperors did not have the luxury to have long-term plans and large-scale commissions. Most of them only had enough time to mint coins to pay their troops, stamping their effigy on it in profile so that people would know who they were, like Trajan Decius here. So each new ruler would set up portraits as quickly as they could because they knew they could be assassinated as well. Now, Trajan Decius is known in the Bible for persecuting Christians. However, here he is not shown as some menacing figure that is in power, that is hunting down this new sect of Christianity. Instead, he looks like a sad old man, here racked with nervous anxiety. And even though this is carved in marble, it looks as though it was modeled in pliant clay. We find that he looks nervous and he looks anxious. Just as we're revealing the character with Caracalla, we now do not show a figure who is going to be steadfast and sure in his decisions. Instead, it is in line with the world weariness and the war weariness as seen earlier in the Middle Kingdom portraits of pharaohs and/or the portraits of Marcus Aurelius. This will give way to a new solution and division of Rome that would avoid these assassinations. For Rome would be divided in 284 Common Era into Western and Eastern halves. The emperor who would come up with this solution, Diocletian, restored order by sharing power with his rivals. In 293 Common Era, he established the tetrarchy, or rule by four, whereby he set himself up as an Augustus or main emperor of the East, and then there is an Augustus of the West. Then we have Eastern and Western Caesars. Basically, he sets up a set of rulers that would be a president and vice president. So when the president is going to retire, the vice president can then take his place and then bring in another vice president. This allegiance is cemented through the marriage between their daughters. So they divorce their current wives and marry each other's daughters to ensure that they are going to be family at this time and would not dare betray each other or attack one another. The tetrarchy is not going to last long, disintegrating in 305 Common Era, but this division of the Roman Empire remains. To this day, we still have the division between Eastern and Western Europe. The best example of portraiture from the tetrarchic period does not come from Rome or Constantinople. In fact, it comes from St. Mark's in Venice, because off to the side, in a part of Spolia attached to the facade, we have the portraits of the four tetrarchs, shown here as a series of purple or porphyry marble that are going to show them as undistinguishable, as once again together, identically clad in this type of concord. They each are going to have their right arm around the other's shoulder with their left hand on their swords below. Now, they are shown as iconic or anti-naturalistic. They are not trying to show who these individuals were nor what they looked like. They are not individualizing them. Instead, we have a conventional or formulaic style that is very self-consciously avoiding naturalism in order to convey that there is something here that is universal or unchanging. So with the large cubical heads and squat bodies, we are showing each one of the figures as identical, so we do not differentiate them. All four have the same power and the same authority. Therefore, the schematic drapery, the shapeless bodies, are going to suggest not what they looked like, but what the idea of an emperor is. Even their faces are now going to become emotionless masks. They are not racked with anxiety or fear like the soldier emperors. They are above that. Though the tetrarchy would not last long, the stylistic innovations that go along with how they show themselves will be long-lasting indeed, thanks to this next emperor, Constantine I, nicknamed Constantine the Great, who was the Caesar of the West, but then invaded Italy in 312, and at the Battle of Milvian Bridge defeated his Augustus Maxentius, taking the capital. He attributed his victory to the Christian God, and hence will legalize Christianity and then make it the official religion of the Roman Empire. He erects an arch right next to the Colosseum, and in between that and the Forum, right at the heart and the crossroads of Rome, so everyone would see this new tripartite arch, which is larger than any we've discussed thus far. In the inscription at the top, it is going to state that he defeated the tyrant Maxentius and thanks this divinity, who remains unnamed, for this victory. This is the first monument that is going to be erected that celebrates a victory of a Roman over another Roman. And because much of downtown Rome is still occupied by the pagans that worship the polytheistic Roman religion, Constantine is going to do a nod of the hat to Christianity, but cannot publicly embrace it as of yet. Testifying to the state in ancient Rome and the lack of resources, every block of this arch was reused from earlier buildings, monuments, and even other triumphal arches. It is spolia. We are reusing material for a new appropriated reason and context. Now, he did not just select any monuments, nor is he going to associate himself with just any emperor. In fact, if you look at those that he selected, taking from Trajan, Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius, each one of these are known as good emperors. So he wants to associate himself with these earlier good emperors. So when he selects an image and does not change it at all, like the largesse of Marcus Aurelius, we are seeing that he's going to be associating himself with the giving of alms to the poor as earlier great emperors had, like the philosopher emperor Marcus Aurelius. Here we have a standard classical example of a relief with differentiated people, individuals down here, a mature man, a young woman, a child. All are going to be below, stair-stepping upward and back into space, where Marcus Aurelius and his entourage are, dropping money down to those individuals below. Turning to the same scene that Constantine's artists will carve for him, we have a very different style. This style is known as the late antique style, which is, by definition, very iconic and anti-naturalistic. It does not attempt to show us what these individuals looked like, nor to show individuals at all. Instead, here we have the same division between people below receiving money from the emperor and his retinue, his entourage above. But now all of the figures are the same. In a cookie-cutter-like fashion, they have the same facial hair, the same expression and dress. Therefore, we are not trying to show a group of individuals. This is a crowd communicating the idea that is the essence here. That is, Constantine is forever going to be magnanimous and charitable, not showing what it would have looked like, but the idea behind it is paramount. This new set of values, which is a rigid formality and an iconic presentation, will supplant the classical notion of the picture window, thus paving the way for iconic art of the Middle Ages and Christian art. Turning to Constantine's own portrait for his own basilica, which was not a religious structure, we have the monumental remnants of his own approach and take on tetrarchic portraiture. Originally, this image would have been seen as a monumental seated statue of Constantine in the guise of Jupiter, and in fact it's modeled after Jupiter, as in his left hand he would have held the orb, much like Marcus Aurelius in his equestrian monument. The whole of the statue would not have been expensive marble or gold, but instead it would have been a brick core with a wooden torso covered with bronze and head and limbs made of marble. Much like what we talked about with the statue of Athena in the Parthenon. It also is a wood and brick core with ivory and gold on the exterior. The nervousness that we saw earlier in the soldier emperors is now gone, supplanted and replaced by this frontal mask we often find with tetrarchic portraiture. These enormous eyes, the broad and simple planes of the head, do not communicate what Constantine looked like. Instead, it communicates the permanence that is going to be suggested by his imperial presence, the power that he holds in his hand as he's literally holding the globe. We, of course, dare not try to assassinate him or attack him, for he is God-like, showing himself like Jupiter here. Now, the idea of something being iconic versus idealized can be illustrated thusly. Here we have the rather anti-naturalistic or iconic features of Constantine, whose eyes are much too large. His brow, his, once again, head is too narrow, too flat. And then we find that his other proportions also are not going to be idealized. The portrait of Augustus shows us the same basic features, proportions, and ratios of a human head and skull. We just remove any of the imperfections that would have existed. He is a perfected version of himself here. This statue would have sat monumentally in the apse of his Basilica Nova, or the Basilica of Constantine, which was 300 feet long and 215 feet wide, and whose dimensions would be the model for the first Christian cathedral we will discuss after coming back from the exam. Here, aside from the Baths of Diocletian, we have the largest building in the capital in a century and the first basilica completed in the city since that of Trajan as part of the Forum of Trajan. Originally, it would have had gleaming colored marble in the coffering, on the floors, in the columns, with composite order capitals, all in this fenestrated sequence of groin vaults, letting light in through the second story above. The Baths of Caracalla would have been the direct precedent and would have been the model for the architects working for Constantine to have as a touchstone. The plans are in fact based on those of the Baths of Caracalla, and we can see in the surviving 3 side chapels or barrel vaulted sections that are coffered that they are in fact modeled on those massive barrel vaults that we find in the Baths of Caracalla. Here we have the plan showing you as well the symmetrical understanding that the architects would have referenced. But the Basilica Nova does not survive intact. To see what it would have looked like originally, we must turn to another commission by Constantine. In the capital in the north, where he was stationed originally at Trier, Constantine is going to create the Aula Palatina, which was a basilica that was converted into a Christian church now. Now, the basilicas in ancient Rome are perfect models for the first Christian churches because of what they do and how they are designed. They are audience halls designed to fit as many people inside as possible and to elevate a platform at the end so we can look at one person speaking. Usually that person is arguing a legal case, but for Christianity, you could replace them easily with a preacher. The terminology in these basilicas also will be important for early Christianity, for we have a rectangular nave, named as such because in Latin it is nave, or a ship, so because it looked like a ship turned upside down. This is where the congregation is going to stand. We also have side aisles, which can be used for burial chapels or smaller services. We enter at the very outset through a narthex, or an atrium, and then we focus our attention on a semicircular protrusion, or apse, usually elevated on a platform with a podium for someone to speak. Next time, we will have an exam, so please review your notes and the slides, go back on the lectures, and let us know if you have any questions.